Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for attending today's event to celebrate International Women's Day with the Global Chamber Miami. The Global Chamber is a thriving community of professionals, mentors, and innovative companies connecting throughout the world of global business. We exist in 195 countries with chapters in 525 metropolitan areas within these countries. Before we begin today's dynamic program, I would like to thank CEO and founder of the Global Chamber, Doug Brunke, as well as Cesar Trabanco, Business Services Manager of the Global Chamber. I would also like to thank our partners for today's event, the Miami-Dade County International Trade Consortium, with special thanks to their Executive Director, Jonathan Ward, and his wonderful team. And lastly, but certainly not least, a very special thank you to our Miami-Dade County Mayor, Mayor Danielle Levine-Cava and her staff, as well as Miami-Dade County Commissioner Danielle Cohen-Higgins and her staff. We now have a special guest who will be delivering a welcome to all of you on International Women's Day. Please welcome Miami-Dade County's first elected female mayor, Mayor Danielle Levine-Cava.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to Global Chamber Miami's International Women's Day Seminar. This is Miami-Dade County Mayor Danielle Levine-Cava, and I'm so very glad to be able to participate in this wonderful program. For years, Global Chamber Miami has been an outstanding partner with Miami-Dade County, helping to shine the light of this community on the world far and wide. And today you're in for what I know will be a fascinating and enlightening conversation about sustainable global leadership with women at the helm. This unprecedented global pandemic has asked us to look at leadership in new ways, and it has made it clear that qualities like compassion, kindness, and empathy are great strengths. And though our communities need more leaders who share these traits, that means having more women in positions of authority will help. While this pandemic has deeply had an impact on everybody, women have borne a disproportionate amount of the burden, especially when it comes to our economic mobility. Building back from this crisis to ensure that we continue to open new doors for the next generation, especially our daughters and granddaughters, will take all of us working together. One of the women you'll soon be hearing from is my dear friend, Danielle Cohen-Higgins, who is now the Commissioner of District 8, the seat that I once held. She'll be joined by Leila, Aridi, Afas, an incredibly impressive woman in her own right, who serves as the Director of International Policy for Toyota Motors North America. So without further ado, I'm incredibly excited to hand it off to two brilliant women. Thank you and enjoy the conversation to come.
As you just heard from our mayor, we have a very exciting program in store with esteemed leaders. I would like to just briefly go over the backgrounds of our leaders here today. I have the pleasure of introducing Commissioner Danielle Cohen-Higgins. Commissioner Cohen-Higgins is a mother, an attorney, and a small business owner, proudly representing District 8 on the Miami-Dade Board of County Commissioners. She is the daughter of Jamaican immigrants who came to the United States in search of better opportunities. She was born at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami and spent part of her early years living in what is now Section 8 housing complex called Milton Manors. She earned a scholarship to Florida State University and became the first in her family to graduate from college and went on to attend law school at the University of Florida. After completing her education, she joined prestigious national law firm of Greenberg Traurig before branching off independently to start her own firm. Thank you so much for being here today, Commissioner. I would like to now introduce Ms. Leila Aridi Afas. Leila is the Director of Global Policy and Strategy for Toyota Motor of North America, where she is responsible for developing strategies to further Toyota's global business goals and advocate policy positions. Previously, Leila was appointed by President Obama to support the goal of doubling U.S. exports in 5 years following the 2008 financial crisis. As an appointee at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, she promoted global sales of U.S. equipment and technology. In a prior role at USTDA, Leila managed a multi-million-dollar portfolio of grant funds for infrastructure projects throughout the Middle East and North Africa to advance economic growth while generating U.S. exports and jobs. I will now turn it over to Leila to facilitate a fascinating discussion on women at the helm of sustainable global leadership. Thank you both very much.
Thank you so much, Linaire, for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. And I can't tell you how inspiring it was to have the mayor introduce this event today. And Commissioner Cohen-Higgins, it's an honor to speak with you today. And I can't thank you enough for spending your time with our audience. So with that, let's get down to it. And I'm very excited about our conversation, but just to sort of familiarize our audience with your impressive background, could you please share a bit of insight about you? It would really be a delight to hear about the person that you are as we begin our chat.
Thank you, Leila, so much. It's really such a pleasure to be here today celebrating International Women's Day. And you know, it's important for me to start out by saying I don't normally wear t-shirts to work, but my t-shirt reads phenomenal woman, okay? And so I wore it exactly today for International Women's Day. And you know, the only thing better than celebrating and championing amazing women is being in the company of amazing women. And I too second your sentiment, Leila, of being very honored by our Madam Mayor, our very first ever Madam Mayor, joining us and having intro welcoming remarks. And Leila, it's a pleasure to meet you and be in your company as well, and be with such an amazingly successful businesswoman that is focused on these critical issues like sustainability. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It really is my honor. Very briefly, my story is, you know, I like to think that it's the story of Miami-Dade County. It's the story that so many of us share in Miami-Dade County, which is the story of immigration, of moving from a different place here to the States into Miami-Dade County in search of better opportunities. And in my story, it was my parents. I'm a first generation American. My parents moved over here literally months before I was born from Jamaica, seeking opportunity, which is the proverbial American dream. And, you know, I was born at a public hospital, which is still here today. And now I sit on the board that, you know, makes decisions about this public hospital. Just last month, we, actually this month, last week, we proclaimed March as Health Heroes Month, and we had executives and leaders of the Jackson Memorial Health Team present at the chambers. And it's just fascinating for me to thank these incredible professionals who literally took care of me the day that I was born. And it really was kind of an incredible honor. So all of that to say, I was born in our public hospital. My family, you know, we didn't have two dimes to rub together when my parents moved over here. So we lived in our public housing for a short while. And I'm a product of our Miami-Dade County public school system. I came up through elementary, middle, and high school. It was never even a conversation to discuss the option of private school at that time. And then I went off to our public university, University of Florida and Florida State University. So I truly am a product of this community. And now I have the incredible honor of being a public servant for the community where I was born and raised. And so, you know, I am a mother, I am a wife, I have two young children, one as young as 18 months. I started this campaign, yes, I started this campaign with my belly out to here, you know, just really determined. And my husband and I said, so long as I'm healthy and so long as the baby's healthy, we will continue as long as the, you know, as the community will have us. And thankfully it all worked out. But yes, you know, that's just a very brief story about me and how incredibly delighted I am to not only be a commissioner for District 8, which represents South Dade, Palmetto Bay, Cutler Bay, parts of Homestead, the Redlands. It's an incredible pleasure to serve after our now mayor, Danielle because she used to represent District 8. So a lot of work to do, but the county has never been in better hands with her as our mayor and a wonderful group of county commissioners.
That is such a wonderful story and how incredibly inspiring. I can't think of a greater gift that to give the people who dedicate so much time and effort at public hospital than to see your success story and how you're giving back. I mean, that is such a tremendously gratifying experience for them. And, you know, it really ties in well to the fact that I'm also a first generation American as well. Our conversation today, and when we think about global sustainable leadership, you know, we've been hearing that term a lot lately, but before we dive into our discussion, I was hoping you could define what it means to you.
Yeah, you know, and I think you're right. There's a lot of discussion about global sustainable leadership and what does that mean? What does that term mean? In my opinion, it means making decisions both at the private and the public sector level. Those that are in the position to make informed decisions, I believe at this critical juncture in our world, where we are at a breaking point from an environmental standard on almost every level, that we cannot make decisions in a vacuum. That decisions have to be made on a holistic, long-range plan, sort of an approach where we are taking into consideration more things than we've ever taken into consideration in the past. And so, you know, global sustainable leadership means making decisions and taking more factors into consideration than ever before, so that we are making smart decisions, not only to increase the bottom line of a profit or to do what's best for a segment of the community, but to make more holistic decisions.
Yeah, and that's goodness. I can't think of a more timely call to action in that regard. And, you know, we've seen women leaders play a particular role when you talk about taking a holistic approach. I mean, they tend to think of their communities, their families, in addition to thinking about profits and bottom lines. So whether they're in business or civil society or government, what unique role do you think women can play in really fostering and growing this idea of global sustainable leadership?
So I'm going to be biased in my response to this question. I'm just going to put that caveat out there from the beginning, because I do kind of believe that women are amazing leaders and have greater capacities than even sometimes we realize, right? And sometimes I think we as women don't give ourselves enough credit and don't realize that the skills we have, whether it's being at home with children or whatever we are doing with our time, it's kind of built in that we are incredible multitaskers and we are able to wear so many different hats. And this pandemic has shown us that on levels that we weren't even prepared to experience ourselves as business owners, as mothers. This idea of wearing all of these different hats has been amplified on so many different levels. So, you know, speaking of taking a holistic approach, I think women are just uniquely positioned because of our maternalistic nature to kind of analyze situations in this very 360 point of view, whether it's, you know, being concerned about, you know, step 1 through 10 of an action that we may take or our child may take. We worry in levels and in ways that I think are unique to us as women. And I think that that level of concern and that depth of analysis serves very, very well in leadership, in making an approach that is holistic, and that is a very, very good complement to global sustainable leadership.
Yeah, I mean, goodness, and there's so many examples of that. And, you know, you mentioned the pandemic, and I think over the past, what is now almost the anniversary, the year exactly, the pandemic has really forced us all to pause, literally, and to reflect on where we are and where we're going as individuals, within our family, our communities, our careers. And so what impact has COVID had on you personally and professionally?
Yeah, that is an incredible question. And, you know, it's such a mixed bag. And I feel as though at least the women and families that I have spoken to have shared this sentiment of it being a mixed bag. I've owned my own business for the last 11 years. 2020 was by far the most challenging year, hands down, where you catch a stride after you've been in business for a few years. You know what works and what does not work, and you apply those principles and you expect it to work because they're tried and tested and you learn from your experience. 2020 threw all the rules out because the rules of our entire world were thrown out. So how do you navigate and continue a successful trajectory for your business in a world where the rules abruptly changed almost overnight. It was incredibly difficult, and we are just now, a year later, starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel and trying from a business perspective to navigate and get out of the slump that was 2020. And thankfully, my business will survive, but it's not for, you know, what wasn't literally the most difficult year. And I know that that's true. You know, I like to say my business went from being a small business to being a tiny business in 2020. I mean, it really was a tremendously different year economically. The flip side to that, however, is, you know, and this is why I say it was a mixed bag. When you ask, how did the pandemic affect me? It allowed me to slow down. It forced me to slow down, where slowing down is not part of my, you know, it's not part of my genetic makeup. Even when I'm 6, 7, 9 months pregnant, I'm going. And the forcing me to slow down allowed me, as a woman, as a mother, as a business owner, as someone committed to my community, to really pay attention to what was going on around me right now, to read people, to pay attention, and to appreciate so much more. So there were a lot of lessons, and we're still learning these lessons as we come through this pandemic, but I am an internal optimist. And so I will always focus on the positive. And at least in my opinion, there was a positive, and there is a positive, at least for me and for my family and for my business from this pandemic, which was a greater perspective of other people's situation, other people's plight, other people's incredible difficulty, having no fault to do of their own, and the perspective of having just tremendous appreciation.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest challenges, is when it is through no fault of their own.
Right.
And, you know, to take that a little further, you know, if we could turn now to economic growth, and which of course is an important aspect of sustainability. And as we seek to boost jobs and household wealth in the wake of COVID, I mean, economic growth is going to be really key to that. And, you know, economists are really referring to the COVID-induced economic slump as a she-cession, just because the majority of the burden of the job losses has been on women. Again, many times through no fault of their own. You've seen a lot of the sectors that are traditionally filled by women, retail and hospitality and things, have been lost, but also women have the challenge of childcare or elder care or household responsibilities, and they've had to make a very difficult choice on what to do. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I think it's unfortunate that, and that stat concerns me greatly, right? Because we think about the movement and the strides that women have taken to be able to balance their life and to be able to have a home life and a work life that is balanced and that works. And to see numbers as staggering as what you mentioned, and I've heard this throughout this pandemic, that this is disproportionately affecting women in the workplace, because it is us who are making that decision to stay home with the children, primarily because our children are being homeschooled. So, you know, who has the money to hire a nanny full-time to stay home with the child? You have to stay home with the child because you're now electing not to put your child in school. And at one point it wasn't an election, it was a mandate. And so, you know, I think that phrase is very fitting, that it's not just a recession, it's a she-cession. And so my hope, and we just spoke about this morning at an event at the county, is that our job as government officials and as businesses, small and large, is to be active in supporting these women when they are ready to return to the workforce. And hopefully, and every family is different and everybody will make the decision on their own time. But what I certainly hope we do not read in the news is that there is any kind of cut in pay, that there's any kind of cut in benefits, and that when these hundreds of thousands of women return to the workforce, that they are on par with where they were before they were forced to leave. Because these are not women who woke up one day and said, I think I'll just stop working. I mean, these are dire situations where families are having to make incredibly difficult decisions. And again, you mentioned it, and I said it, and I'll repeat again, through no fault of their own. So again, our job as government officials, as the business industry, from the private sector, is to make sure that we support and welcome these women when they're ready to return to the workforce, and make sure that there is no dip or decline in where they were as a result of them having to leave.
I'm so really just thrilled to hear that you're already thinking about that. And that's such a key point, because when they return to the workforce, because even when who haven't lost their jobs, they might not be physically going into an office location or a workplace location, but they're still working. And so as companies start to bring folks back into whatever the work environment may be, making sure those who choose to maybe work from home a few days a week or continue doing it full time aren't penalized when it comes to promotions or merit raises, because they're not physically in the space. They're not doing that water cooler chatter or lunch with the boss type stuff, and making sure that they're still recognized for their work, even though they may not physically be on site with other workers, in order, because they do have these other responsibilities that they have to tend to.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. And, when we talk about this pandemic and talking about silver linings and trying to take an optimistic approach, the pandemic from a business perspective, and I know this firsthand because I have friends that work at very large law firms. So I'm hearing about the culture at these law firms and how things are changing. A silver lining of this pandemic is efficiency. People are working just as well, if not more efficiently, from their home, and they're not having to deal with a commute and traffic and a stress, So I think this pandemic is changing the way we work from a very kind of global perspective. And you're absolutely right. I hope that there will not be news articles or any kind of large scale data that shows that when these moms and when these women return to work, whether it's 2 days physical office, 3 days at home, that there's not a cut in pay directly as a result of that life choice. Because again, it's a trend that is turning towards allowing this flexibility that we as women are always looking for. I would presume to say in a work-life balance is having the flexibility. This pandemic has kind of forced that flexibility. And I know a lot of businesses, i.e. law firms, have adapted immediately to that flexibility and are making just as much money as a result of it. So if you're making just as much money as a result of it, then mom and I as the employee have to be able to benefit from it just as much as you are from the larger business perspective level. Yeah.
No, and that really gets that whole equity and equality issue as well. And I think hopefully, as you say, another silver lining is opening our eyes into how we can make things more equitable. And Lanier mentioned at the outset that I had done economic development work in the Middle East and Africa. And one of the things they found is it's a huge region for growing coffee beans, right? And typically they were put in 25-pound bags, even though it's mostly women doing the work. And carrying multiple bags that are 25 pounds each is very challenging. And so just slight changes like in how they package them and put them into smaller poundage so that more women could carry it and take it to market and participate. These aren't radical concepts, but it is just an awareness of these different things and how they impact people. And well, since we are talking about sustainability and we can't talk about it without discussing climate change, how do you think we as women leaders can address environmental challenges? And again, as you've been explaining so eloquently, sort of the ways that women can have a unique perspective or approach to these things. And the other aspect of that is not only the sustainability side, but also the global side, because the fact that unfortunately we can't contain carbon within borders, right? So how do we work with the international community to address the climate crisis?
Yeah, so, this is an interesting question because, and let me be clear, right? Climate change is real. It is here. This is not a subjective opinion-based discussion. And, that being said, I think that, first of all, addressing climate change is all of our responsibility. It is equally the responsibility of men as it is the responsibility of women. But I always say that representation matters, and it matters so greatly. And as it pertains to climate change and what women can do to kind of move the needle on what we know to be an issue that is almost the size of this world, because it's not isolated, obviously, to the United States. It is something that will take an entire globe's effort to, to make any real strides in. Is I want to see more women in leadership. I want to see more women take that leap if their heart is there, and if they feel as though they can contribute, and they feel like they connect with their community, and they feel like they embody the issues that their community needs help improving. I think getting more women involved in politics, in business, in positions of power and leadership is really the key to the answer to that question. It is only then where we have that proverbial seat at the table that our voices will matter enough to make an impact on this critical issue. So I will often, speak with other people or young people or older people and really invite them to look at and consider the world of politics, because it's not until you plant that seed and say to someone, you can do this too, that light bulb never even turns on for them. And as you know, politics, there's no school to go and get a training course on how to navigate this. So I always offer myself as a resource to anybody. And again, if you're in Massachusetts or in California, it's going to be a very different experience. But to the extent that you're navigating or considering a role like that for yourself in Florida and in South Florida, I would be happy to have a conversation with any woman, with any mom, any small business owner that thinks that their voice is one that would be good to represent their community, and that their heart is in it and they'd be interested in doing it as well. So often, they say that it takes, a man one time to ask him to run for office, but with women, it takes like 7 or more. I think that that's absolutely true, and that needs to change. And we're also always, again, thinking it's not the right time. When my kids get older, the problem with that, and if that works for you, then that's wonderful. But the problem with that is if we wait until our children are grown to enter the world, and our male counterparts are entering the world in their 20s and their 30s, right? We would be entering at an age where they've reached incredible seniority, and we're just starting. And therefore our opportunity to serve is necessarily far more limited. And so, I just encourage more women to think about, if their heart is there, the world of politics, because it really is for more of us. And I would love to see more women running for office.
Well, I think you might get several offers for advice on how to run for office, but that's an excellent point, and one that I really have not heard made so clearly, that if you wait, then you're ceding the floor for perhaps decades.
That's right.
Others. And so, seeing more examples like you, people who are getting in there, even when they have 18-month-olds or young children, I think is really important. And I see the chat box lighting up. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lanier, who is going to share some of the questions that have been popping up from our audience. And as I do so, audience, please continue to type in more questions. And so this last one is, I think, particularly intriguing because last year, of course, 2020, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted most, though certainly not all, American women the right to vote. And so as we look forward the next 100 years, what do you think the rallying cry should be for women?
Yeah, and that's another excellent question. If I am sitting here projecting and thinking about the next 100 years, what I would love to see is parity and representation. It's really as simple as that. And that kind of leads over from my previous response, which is, in Miami-Dade County, for example, there have been studies done that are now mayor, then commissioner, commissioned regarding how inequitable women are getting paid in Miami-Dade County. We are a huge metropolitan county. Our budget is larger than 13 state budgets in the United States of America. And our women are still not getting paid as much as men. So what is going on with that? And I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe that from the US congressional and Senate perspective, representation of women is only at about 20%, 25%, something in that range. That is unacceptable because we make up 50% of the population. So this is why I say representation matters. That other 20% gap needs to be filled by women, not men, not just because we're women, but because we're exceptionally qualified to do the job. And so, the rallying cry for women, I think for the next 100 years, for me, would be to change this perception that only a certain group of women can and should get involved in politics, and that you have to look a certain way, you have to, have a certain husband or a certain last name or a certain bank account to be able to enter into this world in a meaningful way. If I can have any hand in getting younger women involved in politics, I think the next 100 years would be a lot more bright for women on a whole.
Well, that is it. And that is our rallying cry. And just to your point, you are correct. It is 25% of the US Senate that's female. That actually is up from the last election. And then of Fortune 500 companies, only 7% have female CEOs, 7% when women are more than 50% of our population, and only 3% are women of color. So clearly a lot that we need to do.
That's a problem. Yes.
That is a problem.
And I am a woman of color. And again, when you parse down that statistic, not just for women, but then you start looking at women of color, it's almost abysmal. Like, women, let us do this. What resource do we need in order to invite women at a younger age, not only to be advocates, because advocacy is almost built in. I always say the best title for an advocate is mom. Because if you have gone through the experience of having a child, you know what it means to fiercely advocate for something, whether it's something related to the child's school issue or an after school activity. Advocacy is in you. And so, I certainly would love to see more women, and particularly women of color, because the numbers are really so low, get more involved in politics and at an earlier age so that we can be on par. Again, I'm looking for parity. I'm not looking for majority women, right? I'm looking for parity, and hopefully we can get there in the next 100 years, if not certainly earlier.
Right. We want our Congress, our boardrooms, everything to look like our society.
That's right.
And all of
not too big of an ask, and it shouldn't be too big of an ask.
No, not at all. And with that, speaking of ask, Lanier, I am going to invite you back and ask if you could please share some of the questions that have popped up.
Thank you so much, Leila and Commissioner Cohen-Higgins. That was really insightful information. And we do have questions through the chat. One is to your recent point, Commissioner. We have Susan Asadi who's asking, what is the best point of entry if you are considering leadership in politics? And is being a commissioner the best position to start with?
Yeah, and so that's an excellent question. And the answer is going to be completely that it depends. The best entry point is going to be where there is an opportunity in your neighborhood, in your city, in your municipality. If you're passionate about school issues, then run for your school board. If you're passionate about maybe zoning or planning issues, maybe overdevelopment in your community, run for your regional planning council. The entry point is going to be specific to what moves and motivates you in conjunction with whatever opportunity is present, right? So if there is an entry point that you're looking for on the school board, but your current school board member has been there for 20 years and they're running for re-election, that's probably not going to be the best. And not saying you shouldn't do it, but you got to, figure out all of those factors as part of your analysis of where, number one, you can actually get into a seat, but primarily what moves you and what issues are most important to you. Once you start asking those questions, where the entry point is that is right for you will make itself apparent.
Thank you so much. This is a really great question. Commissioner, you talked a lot about women and the pandemic hitting women the hardest. In terms of the fourth industrial revolution and AI technology, how might some of those jobs that women hold in service and automation be impacted? And what could be some of the examples of solutions or maybe technology for women to get more involved in?
Wow, that question is that question is a big one that I'm going to be honest, and I don't know the answer to that at this moment. I have not given thought to artificial intelligence and AI technology, other than from the perspective of knowing that it was an issue that was raised quite a bit during certain presidential elections, and it being a general concern for the workforce. Automation is consuming jobs, both for men and for women. But specifically as it pertains to women, I don't know that I can contribute meaningfully to that question at this moment, but I'm certainly happy to get back to you on that. That's an excellent question, but I'm going to admittedly say I'm not sure what the answer to that one is.
And Lanier, if I could just add on that point, McKinsey just came out with a paper on this, the workforce of the future. And I can tell you that it's something that within my company, we're thinking about a lot. You know, I mean, we saw over the past, Doug Ronke, I know he's with us today, that trade got was a culprit for a lot of job loss, but actually it was automation. A lot of economists say 70–80% of that was actually due to automation. And what it does is it spurs other jobs. And I think what the question is, how will that look like? How will that look in the future? Because it's not just AI is taking over what had been dangerous manual jobs that we're glad humans don't have to perform them because of the safety and security issues. But now, you know, the joke is they're going after Phil in accounting, or Philippa in accounting, you know, if you will, is that they're able to do more of what we consider like office jobs. So it's not as much as a relief because there's not a lot of danger in those jobs, and it's a way of earning a living. And so how do you adjust to that? And just as an economist by training, I'll add the classic example is the ATM. When automated teller machines first came on the market, everybody's like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is awful. All these bankers are gonna lose their jobs. But what we actually saw was a several multiple, I'd have to look up the exact amount, increase in the amount of bank branches. Because what happened was, now that people could just deposit checks and grab cash from a machine, it freed up the tellers to get training and offering financial services like mortgage or investment or retirement accounts. And so no one saw that coming. Just like when the iPhone was invented, no one saw this whole industry of app makers, you know, so we can't necessarily predict, but we need to make sure that we have sort of the infrastructure in place in terms of policy, but also in terms of access, broadband education, so that people can be innovative and think about what new opportunities that provides.
That's really fascinating. Thank you so much, Leila. There's a question for you, Leila. In terms of sustainable leadership and development, do companies like the Millennial Challenge Corporation, private public partnerships take on these roles? Are they something to consider to move forward with sustainable leadership and development?
Yes, and so the Millennium Challenge Corporation, despite its name, is actually a U.S. government agency. And so they have a unique mission, and that they really try to harness the best of like private sector resources and expertise to advance economic growth in what we would call like emerging or middle income countries. And so their criteria is more stringent than a lot of other traditional development assistance agencies, in the sense that the recipient countries has to meet criteria in terms of everything from inoculation rates to how many girls they let into school and things like that. And I think it's a great model, because if we've learned anything over the past year, it's that the challenges are too great for us to tackle on our own. And we have to work together as industry, as government, as cities and states and civil society. We have to work together and move away from finger pointing, if you will, and more towards like, how can we work this together? But I think MCC's models is really great. They've had some, you know, considering they've only been around for a bit now, relative to the other government agencies, they've had some great successes. So I think that is something that we should look forward to. And again, because of the criteria, they do have climate commitments as well. And I think that is something that's very helpful.
That sounds great. This curtails right into that question. Someone's asking whether less economically developed countries in the next 100 years, how do you promote inclusivity for countries that are not as wealthy as the US and other countries? And
Leila,
that's,
do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that? I'm sorry, Lanier, was that for me?
that it's not directed to anyone in particular.
Yeah, and so, again, when we talk about global leadership, like I mentioned Miami-Dade County being very large because it is very large with a $9 billion budget. And so in some ways we're running like a small country here in a lot of ways. And so the only thing I can do is apply, the principles that we have engaged here at the county commission in hopes that giving advice along those lines would work in other countries. But obviously every country is going to have its own, rules and regulations and laws that would have to be navigated. But speaking of International Women's Day, if I'm not mistaken, this spawned from not only celebrating women and supporting women, but also to highlight marginalized women in other countries and in communities where they don't have the access and opportunity that we have here. And so, whether it is joining the Peace Corps or whether it is creating opportunities for women to serve in positions of leadership and representation. And again, certain countries, as we know, women's rights are abysmal. They don't exist, right? And so me talking about representation and leadership may be completely out of the question for some of the countries that may be implied in this question. But I firmly believe that change comes through representation, and the more diverse and equitable of representation any community can have through and via its leadership, the better off that community is going to be.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And we have time for one more question, which a person's asking, which leaders are most inspirational for you?
I don't know if that's for me, but I'll go ahead and take it. And Leila, I would love to hear your response as well if we have time. But right now, I am particularly inspired by our newest Vice President, Kamala Harris. And again, I'm going to admit bias here because not only is she a woman of color, not only is she of Jamaican descent, not only is she a lawyer and a litigator, she's a woman. And so I am particularly thrilled at her accomplishment of being the United States' first female woman of color vice president. And she inspires me greatly because, I have an 18-month-old and an 8-year-old. And during the last presidential election, I said to him, what do you think about a woman being president one day? He said, Mommy, why not? And that approach and that attitude and that innocence in his mind, and hopefully the generation that comes after us will enter this world with a more equitable view. And hopefully in our lifetimes, we'll see so many more women, not only in the politics world, but 7% of CEOs being women is completely insufficient entirely. And so our current vice president certainly is the woman that inspires me the most.
Thank you. And Leila, who inspires you?
So I'm gonna limit it to one person. I'm just gonna follow the commissioner's lead, who grabbed the person I was thinking of. So I will, but as someone else who's also in the news, especially for those of us who work in the trade world, is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is the new head of the World Trade Organization, the first woman and the first African to hold that role. And she's a two-time former finance minister for Nigeria. Used to be executive leadership of the World Bank. She's brilliant. She lives in my home state. Now, of course, she's in Geneva, where the World Trade Organization is headquartered. But I think she is just her background and her expertise and her vision are just really at a time when countries need to work together in order to really just combat this virus and protect people. They unfortunately are putting up a lot of barriers. And so if anybody can lead the way and walking away from that and opening borders and trade lanes so that we can really boost our economies and get out of this wake of COVID, I think she's the one to do it. So.
Thank you both very much. So this has been a really incredible and important discussion. Anyone else who has questions, we're out of time for this part. We're moving on to a roundtable discussion, but you could email me. We'll put the email in the chat and we can have our panelists get back to you with answers. So please join me in thanking Leila, Aridi, Afas, and Commissioner Danielle Cohen-Higgins. Thank you both so very much.
Thank you, Lanier. Thank you, Commissioners of Honor.
Thank you. It was an honor and a true pleasure. Be safe, everyone. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we are bringing in our next group of panelists for a roundtable discussion.
Hi, Lanier. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Are we ready to start?
Yes, we are.
Terrific. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Skoko Rodriguez, and I'll be moderating this panel discussion. I am the Executive Director of the Commission for Women, as well as the President of the League of Women Voters in Miami-Dade County. And I have the pleasure to introduce you all to Rubby Golo from Ghana, who is the Executive Director for the Global Chamber in Ghana, as well as the CEO of Global Trade Consult and an advisory board member of the Livestock and Fisheries Chamber in Ghana, and a former trade development manager from the UK government. Next, I would like to introduce Camelia Mazard, the president of OWIT International. And followed by Cami, please welcome Emmy Hanado-Hutton, the digital innovation and business leader who promotes Japanese business opportunities in South Florida. And finally, Katie Keith, who is the area launch director for BNI Global, manager strategic partnerships, equals, and executive director of the Global Chamber in London. Welcome, everyone.
And I might add that Rubby Golo apologizes. She has lost connection in Accra at the moment. So she might join us later if she's able to. Thank you all.
Thanks for letting us know, Lanier. Such is the strife of being a global chamber. So please welcome, ladies, on this terrific International Women's Day. We're so happy to have each of you in your respective roles. Could you all take some time and tell us about the work that you do?
Sure, I can go ahead and start. So in my day job, I'm an international trade attorney. I practice mostly anti-dumping and countervailing duty law. I specialize also in customs. So the past 4 years have been very interesting to be an international trade female attorney in Washington, D.C. We've had to deal with different types of tariffs from around the world, whether they're national security tariffs or whether they're intellectual property tariffs. And that day job helps me transition to a group in which I'm the current president, and that's the Organization of Women in International Trade. We are an entity that is comprised of chapters around the world. Presently, we have 23 chapters around the world, so you basically join your local chapter. I'm the past president of the DC chapter of WIT, and if you're located in an area where you do not have a chapter, we also have virtual chapters. So excited to be here today on International Women's Day. I know it's been going 110 years strong, so happy to give a little bit of view perspective from an international trade attorney.
Thank you, Cami. Katie, could you let us know a little bit about the work you do?
Yes, thank you very much, Monica. It's an absolute delight to be here for International Women's Day. I'm very passionate about supporting and using our platform as much as we can to get out there and talk about these issues that we face continuously. And I'm calling in from London this evening, and I am the Executive Director for the Global Chamber here in London. And I'm also really focused on helping business owners and executives in business to transform themselves and their businesses, connect with one another, and grow internationally. So I do that in a lot of ways. I work directly with these people to understand what their opportunities are. And I love using the Global Chamber as a platform for businesses to connect with one another and have these types of conversations where they can know, like, and trust people in different regions around the world and do trade more freely. So I'm really, really passionate about doing that. And I also work on a more local level here in London, supporting businesses to grow and connect here. And I work with BNI, and I'm working with them very closely on their growth strategy to bring that to life and give more people the opportunity. Because I think the more we invest in people and their businesses, the more that enriches those communities around them. So that's what my focus is.
Thank you, Katie. And Emmy, you want to tell us more about what you do? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. My name is Emmy Hanado-Hutton, and I'm originally from Tokyo, Japan, but I'm currently working as a digital innovation counsel for Global Chamber, as well as I'm actually been involved in the AI technology. So, it's been really challenging, like a journey, like since I'm a woman, I'm a diverse candidate. There's a lot of challenges, but I'd be like really happy to, have a discussion and help everybody else. And my really passion is really also, connecting all the businesses globally and then smaller the globe. And so we all can actually collaborate, and especially like women in leadership. It's really one of my passions to do as well.
Thank you so much. And thank you all, each of you, for being here. And clearly you come from such diverse backgrounds and work. I would love to know what women's leadership means to you. And I'd love to start with Katie.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's no doubt that women in leadership roles really bring back a lot to the economy, because women statistically are more likely to invest more into their families, themselves, the well-being, and just generally give back a lot more. So I think, for me, women in leadership, there just aren't enough. I think there's something about empowering women to find their voice and find their place to step up and lean in a bit more into leadership roles. So I work with a lot of young female leaders coming through and learning how to overcome the imposter syndrome, for example. So a lot of women, it's about sort of empowering women to become leaders and educating them on what that looks like. For me, being in leadership roles for the past 20 years, it's always been it's been a learning, it's been like a journey for me, and I learn something new every single day. I was having a conversation this afternoon and just listening to this panel just now, some of the amazing stories about what women are doing out there, but also where the gaps are as well. There are so many gaps still for us to cross. So I think for women in leadership, we have the luxury of having a voice and being at the table and being able to use that voice to actually make change happen. So I think women in leadership for me comes a responsibility as well.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica.
And I'm going to have to consult with you about the imposter syndrome, because that's certainly something that I go through, and many women do as well. So Emmy, Cami, would you like to let us know your thoughts on women in leadership, where we need to go from here, and what it means to you to be a woman in leadership?
Sure, I can go first. And definitely, I also came through a technology perspective. Many of the years, there's a male dominant area. And then, there are times that I was working for some of the company, there is something called a boys club. But, I think women leadership, they bring in not just to being, sensitive and then bringing empathy, but I think being, some people are mothers, some people are very nurture in perspectives, so they can bring not just to being different perspective, but also like really out of I guess like a different like a thinking that they can bring the table. You can do like a collaboration, innovations, and I think those are really missing in many of the areas in the business. And whether it's like here in US or globally, in the past in Japan, so many people are like really housemakers, not really that many people are really in the business world. And back in 2015, and Japan actually brought an act about bringing women and participating by 2020 for about 30%. That actually increased 90,000 women in the leadership. So I think that's pretty successful. Hopefully Japan continues more to do so, but that it's not just to Japan, but any countries, any global businesses come together and have a balance. I think that's really more women in leadership to me.
So let me just dovetail onto that. So we can look at women's leadership, in, 4 different points of view. So first, we need to raise awareness among our girls, and that is, raising them as children through educators as well as through parents to reject gender bias, right? And then you find that when you start lifting up women and girls in all fields, and you start listening to women's expertise, they start having confidence. And we also, as women leaders, need to mentor women and girls and encourage them to aim high. So just looking at 2021 in the United States, dovetailing on what some of the earlier presenters said, it's been a monumental year for women breaking glass ceilings and moving society. We have, Kamala Harris being the first Madam Vice President of the United States. We have Sarah Thomas, who was the first female National Football League referee and an official at the Super Bowl. We have Rosalind Brewer, who was the first and only Black woman to be running a Fortune 500 company at the moment. And then leadership can be very young. If you look at Amanda Gorman, she's the first National Youth Poet Laureate. So leadership comes in all forms. And that's pretty much how I'd like to continue, raising awareness among our children, educators, and parents to reject gender bias.
Thank you so much, Cami. I love that point that you made about mentorship. I think it's very easy to forget once you reach a certain part of your career, what it felt a year ago or 5 years ago, what it felt like. And that is just so important. And thank you for mentioning that. So we're going to get a little more into the weeds of our discussion now. And please, if anybody has any questions or comments, you can put them into the chat or the Q&A and we'll check it and share your questions. So now I really want us to talk about what kinds of policies, and this can be national or global, do you all think could open up more opportunities for women in business and trade? So I'll start with Emmy to give us more of the tech perspective and perhaps the Japan and Asia market as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Japan, actually, they really started like innovation programs for women. So many years that, they're a little bit like the behind. Yes, it's the technology is really like the male dominant area, but I do see some of the programs like a really women specific universities were really talking about technology, and then many of people are really concerned about, like, for example, like a space I work in the AI space, where they maybe, whether it's a men or women, may not be able to work because they're replacing by the machine learning. But that's really not the case, not said every way. I mean, so of course it's debatable, but I think that's bringing to like more, bringing different perspective services. For example, in Japan, customer service is a highly, really a quality compared to any other countries, like really expectations super high. That means, any like machine learning can take care of like transactions or anything else, but people can actually like build a relationship, have a conversation, more meaningful, like a relationship in customer service and things like that. So I think it's a, technology perspective, like I think it's like a women's definitely really good in like those quality control, quality customer service. Certainly, hopefully bringing that opportunities to not just in Japan, but also globally, and see that sort of expectations here as well.
And in the AI and tech industry, are you seeing a lot of attention being paid to how to build up the AI industry in an equitable way, so we ensure gender parity once AI might be replacing certain functions and things like that? Are you seeing those policies being put in place to protect women?
Right now, there isn't a particular policy. However, I do see that I also have involved in something called Women in Tech, and we really try to standardize those policies to be recognized. And I think that's really a start, but it really, for me, even like starting like small communities, really bringing those, using the power of internet, power of AI to really split those words so we can actually bring like the gender parity in the technology sectors as well.
Great, thank you. Katie, you want to follow up?
Yeah, and I think that just following on from that, it is, I think that we're all committed to making some form of change in equality in trade. I think it's just about forming cases and collecting data and statistics to understand where we can build these cases to put forward and sort of, shape what that change looks like. And I think that, there's lots of different conversations happening around the world at the moment. It is about we're really, standing up for the change, choosing to challenge, which is our theme for International Women's Day. But I think it is about collecting those statistics. Like Emmy said, it's, women in tech, we're emerging and, we're coming in and we've got boots on the ground and we're doing it. But it's about how are we forming those statistics and bringing those in and putting them forward as case studies for change. I know, Cami, you've probably got a lot more off the back of that around the policy side, but I think for me, just from what I'm seeing, I think there needs to be some case studies put forward and put forward for change.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think nationally or globally, obviously you think of things along free trade agreements or how we can sort of cooperate and trade globally around the world. But what we always forget about too is, basic social policies that open up opportunities for women in business and trade. And they need to be ingrained in all of our societies. And it starts young, like I was talking about mentoring, reminding girls in our lives that they are strong and, that you can have the ability to be more than your appearance, right? Praising girls for their intelligence, their strength, and their leadership. You start this young, you encourage girls to speak out and tell them that they're bold, they're not bossy. When we change our adjectives around this, it sort of helps, start these policies young. So when we get older, we can sort of affect trade, whether you look at the United States, our Secretary of Commerce is a female, our new USTR rep is a female. So we're definitely making changes in terms of trade. And when you talk to these two women, Catherine and Gina, they say that they were asked their opinions young and they listen. And when they speak, they show that everybody's thoughts matter. So we can continue to encourage girls to explore the opportunities in trade and otherwise. I think we can all achieve our full potential.
Thank you so much. And please, I want to encourage you all, if you hear somebody say something that you fervently agree with or fervently disagree with, feel free to jump in. You don't have to wait for me to call on you. So I'd love to move to the next question that we have, which is, it kind of piggybacks off of what Katie was talking about and forcing change. We're in the middle of a forced change in the way that we do business because of the pandemic. One of the, probably lasting effects of that is, for example, work from home, and how that, has just organically happened because of being forced on us. And it is something that might really help a lot of mothers and families to create a balance. So I was wondering how the COVID pandemic, it's forced us all to pause and reflect on where we are and where we want to go in terms of gender parity, gender equity, whether it's in our careers, our community, our countries, or globally. And how has the pandemic impacted your point of view personally, professionally, in really any way? Emmy, you want to take it first?
Sure. So as far as professional career-wise, I'm like one of those fortunate that I've been working digitally, remotely, even way before the pandemic. So it really hasn't much a whole lot of change in my perspective. However, I see many of the businesses really have to quickly transform digitally, and that kind of make me think, well, how can I help? And that's really my a passion became more bigger because I have this fortunate situation. Many of people, for example, one of my great friends, she's in the medical field. She almost lost her job because of the fact that she was not be able to go to the office. And I asked essentially really, you need to maybe strategize to convince your managers and how you can digitally work, because most of the telework can be done in medical, but anyway, I could help. It really makes me think that, giving back to what I have, my knowledge of how I can contribute, so get me more stronger to proactively help others.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a shift in how we as a society think, and the telework is a really great example. Cami, did you want to say something?
Yes, so this year, I think there were sort of two themes for International Women's Day, right? One was choose to challenge, and I think we are looking at how we can sort of challenge different concepts when it comes to what the traditional workplace was, right? For years, many women, when they went into the legal field, wanted to take a 40% or 60% route, and it was thought that you could not work from home. God forbid you couldn't do these things from home. Now, when the pandemic forced all of us to do this from home, we've now seen that how is the world going to change, right? Is this going to be the new normal, which I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing? But one of the things that I also wanted to sort of focus on would be another theme that's come out of this is women in leadership. You see a number of women have come to thrive. You know, it's achieving an equal future in the COVID-19 world. So as women, I think we need to help shape a more equal future and help others, you know, to the extent that we can, whether it's in policy, the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's participating in virtual celebrations. I mean, now we have the opportunity in the Zoom world to actively log on to things with high-level dignitaries where we probably didn't have the opportunity. And you probably saw that in the fundraising, you know, around the campaign, whether you were involved, you know, with gender equality issues, or you could see a number of women whose voices were amplified, and everybody had access to people in the world of Zoom.
Yeah, I have to piggyback off the back of that. It's never been more important for us to stay connected because it has been very trying and isolating for a lot of people. So having technology to connect with one another it's more important than ever. And I think I was reading an article that the UN Women wrote. It was really interesting on the way gender equality in COVID-19 and the response to that. Well, actually, it's important to highlight the role that women have taken in the response to COVID and the fact that we've made up most of the care units that have been out there responding on the front line. And I just wanted to sort of say something about that tonight, because I just want to take my hat off to all the women that are out there on the front line, sacrificing the nights with their families and isolating from their families. And I think here in the UK, in particular, the NHS has really been under a lot of strain. And it's not just the sort of the unit that is under strain, it's the individuals that are on the front line. And a majority of those have been women playing those roles out there because it's not just a health crisis, it's a shutter shock to our economy. And so it's impacting more than ever. And so majority of us are caregivers. So hats off and hurrah to all of the women out there. I just wanted to say that. For me, I've got really mixed feelings about how the pandemic's impacted even on my own life. And I think if I didn't have the mentors, the technology, the community that I've built around me over the years, I would have struggled even more with my mental health and the way I was adapting to the changes that were being thrown at me. So I think it's really important to reach out to people, make sure that you're not isolating yourself. You know, pick up the phone. If you've got Zoom fatigue, pick up the phone and have a good old chat. You know, make sure you keep in touch with your family. I think those have been really important things. But yeah, I think if you do those things, and I think it will make us all very strong at the end of this, because we'll have a certain level of resilience that we've developed through this. Thank you.
I also agree on Katie too. Of course, you know, we do connect in Zoom quite often in your professional environment too. But also, for example, I'm really focusing on the teams and group. Well, let's have a really fun conversation that has nothing to do with the business work. And that really kind of helped to build the relationship, getting closeness, really find out where their challenges are. And, you know, we all attack that and find the solutions together. I think that's brings a better solution and also, you know, strong message and be able to work together strongly.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the pandemic has really pushed people to their limits in many bad ways, but in many good ways as well. Looking at the flip side, a lot of people have realized that you know, scary technology is not as scary as they believed. Like Emmy and a couple of folks have mentioned, working from home doesn't mean that your employees are going to just, you know, go take naps all day. It's really a very good return on investment and will hopefully propel us into the future with using tech to its highest functionality. So again, just if you have any questions, you can post it right in the chat or in the Q&A. I just had another question for all of you. What role do you see women leaders around the world playing in sustainable growth in business, government, and society in general?
I think that I'll take it. I just think I agree that empowered women leaders around the world need to continue to play a huge role in using their voices to bring about change and talk about the big questions. You know, bring the big questions to the table. You know, what is the next thing that we're looking at? Are we looking at girls and education around the world? How do we influence them to be empowered and create more change? But I also just wanted to say, there are more men in power and in influential positions than women around the world. So we need their help in making this change come about, because the generations after us need to be educated and need to be brought through a system where they're encouraged. They're encouraged to be leaders in their own right. They're encouraged to bring the big questions to the table. I work with a lot of young, amazing leaders who are working, you know, in the early 5 or 6 years of their careers, and they're really seeing the big questions and they're bringing it to the table and they're not afraid to talk about it. They're seeing the world through a different lens to what I am in my 40s. Do you know what I mean? So we need to lean on these generations. We need to encourage them as young leaders to come through with that voice. And I think that comes down to investment from organisations, from governments and beyond, in programs that are going to help bring these new leaders through in the generations and help them to develop those skills to answer those big questions as we come about. And there's layers, like we're dealing with the big questions of, you know, a global crisis, a pandemic, you know, but there are other layers to that too. So I do think it's about investment into programs. I think it's about putting big questions on the table, developing work groups across the globe with people from different backgrounds to get around a table and work towards a common goal. So I think there's so much we can do to take action as opposed to just be talking about it.
I agree. And
yeah, that's what I feel.
Great that you mentioned that, you know, so often these conversations about women's parity and gender parity are happening amongst women. And we really need to make sure that we're bringing everyone to the table, everyone who has the power to make these systemic changes that we're talking about. Emmy or Cami, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I mean, I definitely agree. I think my strong message here is continue to take in actions, and, you know, not just in a conversation, of course, like, for example, like, you know, today, I think that Joe Biden's like signing up for like the Gender Policy Council. Okay, well, men has been involved with those conversations too, but maybe use them, collaborate. I think it's all about the collaborations and really bringing that to make an action in detail. I think that will make a little change in the growth, and hopefully that you know, that's going to be increased, not just to like the men and women, but also like diversity, a different you know, group of type of people, not just the age and colors and women. And I think it's all about collaboration, I think.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I mean, we're all facing, you know, what could be one of the worst economic downturns since the Great Depression, right? And we're trying our best as women to weather this global pandemic as a whole. So I think, again, when you go back and you look at social policy, as women leaders around the world, we can highlight how individually we can all reduce our impact on the world significantly. So when you talk about sustainability, like how can we personally affect climate change and help mitigate our impact on the world? We can facilitate sustainable growth. We can promote, you know, different kinds of credos like recycling, upcycling, donating your clothes, you know, and other goods. I know Dress for Success and other places have put temporary stops on accepting goods because of the pandemic. But when things reopen, everybody's going to need, you know, things to interview, different clothing. So encouraging others to do all of these things and not buying single-use plastics. I think these are great ways to encourage others to sort of rally around each other so we come out of this better than we went into it.
Thank you, Cami. And in the portion before, a question was posed regarding what women inspire you. And I would love to hear the answers to that question, whether it's global leaders or your grandmother. I would love to hear you all talk a little bit about the women that inspire you.
I can take that one first. So I got asked this question earlier today when I was running a meeting, and the first woman that came to my mind was Louise Haye, and she's a motivational speaker and self-help woman. And I think it was about 20-something years ago when I read her book, Empowering Women. And I must say that made a huge impact on me in my life, because I didn't know how empowered I could be as a young sort of 19-year-old girl who didn't know who she wanted to be or where she wanted to go. And I think over the years, I've often gone back to that book, and I've read many of her others, and I've read thousands of other books. But I think the most important thing was the messaging in that around how I have self-worth, and I mean something. And so to have that lesson early on in that part of my life, I always hung on to that. So that's probably made the biggest impact for me in terms of my empowerment and my self-worth as a woman. And it led me on a journey of self-development.
Yeah, I know I mentioned 4 names earlier, so obviously each and every one of those women inspire me. But as you also indicated, you know, a woman gave birth to each person here today, right? So in terms of me and my life, obviously my mother was a great inspiration to me. She played a key role in every moment of progress that I've had ever since, always inspired me, you know, to go the extra distance, go the extra mile, and know that I was a strong, amazing woman, and that she served as a role model to me coming here, you know, from a small country called Haiti, and breaking down barriers and creating new global opportunities for her and our family here in the United States.
Here, Cami. I have to do a shout out for my mum, a single mum with 3 children, bringing us up and working full time. The strength that I took from my mother as a woman. So yeah, you're right. Our mothers are very important, and all the mums out there.
Yeah, it's definitely mother is one of the inspiration person as well. I came here when I was 18 years old, just decided that I really, like to explore my life outside of Japan. And they're very, really always they always have my back, and also really inspirational, always cheer me up. Also, definitely the vice president too. I also came from Japan by myself. I still live here by myself. And then really like a women diversity, like be able to be able to speak up, bring your voice. I think it's really inspirational for me.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure each of you is an inspiration to other women everywhere. And I'm going to ask a question from our Q&A. If you were able to go back to the past and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Where do we begin on that one, Monica? If I had the privilege of time travel, goodness me, I'd be a millionaire today. I just think the one piece of advice that I'd give myself is just believe that everything is going to be okay, and just trust your gut, because a lot of the time the gut's one. So sometimes when you have that imposter syndrome coming up, which I mentioned before, just break past that, because you know what's waiting on the other side isn't as scary as you think.
Yeah, and those are 2 of my favorite buzzwords as well. I always say that it took me time to eliminate imposter syndrome, you know, being one of the few female partners, you know, in a predominantly male environment as an international trade lawyer in Washington, D.C. So my piece of advice would be, don't be so worried what others think of you. You know, too many women say no because they doubt their own capability. And I just would wish I'd said yes more.
Yeah, I really also have something similar to that. And many times I came from Japan originally very shy, wasn't really, in front of everybody else. Really, keep trying, and you know what, everything's gonna be okay. And then you know what, like you said, anybody else think, and then you know what, look for like the positive outlook, and you just reach for that no matter what. I think that I'll give myself to them.
I love all of those pieces of advice. Thank you all. I'm gonna invite Linaire back with us.
Hello.
Hi, Lanier.
Hi. So this is really incredible because we have Monica who works with government, we have Emmy who works with technology, we have Cami in trade and Katie in business. So really any women watching that is interested in any of these fields or you're already working in these fields, I mean, these are wonderful experts, multi-industries right here. So my question is, what route did you take to get to where you are today? Was there always a vision, or did maybe life steer you in different directions that you weren't expecting? This is
Well,
for anyone who wants to answer.
I guess I can start here. I think, it's for me, it's changed quite a bit because I originally really started from the hospitality and service industry. And then it really got me to where, well, the technology can help not just to be in businesses, but it's also, for me, I came from Japan again, and many of the technology perspective is really male dominant. And how do I really embark? How do I really help? How do I connect? Really life-changing for me, and hopefully that I can inspire other women be also intact and not just to being, shy about it, be able to being strong and then reach your goal and reach your vision. You know what? If you have a bigger vision than goals, then you can get there.
And I can just talk briefly on the trade route. I was walking out of work one day and a colleague said, come to this happy hour with me. And she asked me if I would attend, and it was the DC chapter of Women in International Trade. So over the past 20 years, I became involved with OWIT. I think I mentioned I was the past president of DC. But in terms of the parent organization, I started off as an alternate to the international board, and then I became a permanent representative. I was the VP of conference and the general counsel, executive vice president, and now I'm president. And I've been able to forge liaisons with groups like the Global Chamber, and I'm happy with all the exposure. So just, happenstance or just how life takes you, you end up being able to network with like-minded women.
Oh, that's really lovely, Emmy and Cami, just to hear those stories. I think for me, I only realized what I wanted to be when I grew up only a couple of years ago. And after 20 years of working in the corporate and retail banking sector and then making the brave move to leave Sydney and move over to the UK in 2016, my life really started to transform because I was exposed to different opportunities, and it got me thinking about where the next 40 years of my life is going to go. And I think it's okay to have those moments and just sit back and take some time to reflect. And I did just that. And I realized that my heart is working in business with people who are running businesses, with leaders, and having taken leadership roles for so long and coaching and developing teams. I think that's where my passion lies. So I'm now doing a master's at Henley Business School in executive coaching and behavioural changes. I'm really interested in how workforces are moving with the implementation of AI and technologies, and how people are going to adapt to that. And, and coming into an environment, a community like the Global Chamber, and being able to lead and use that platform in my business community and BNI, that has been an organic process as a part of this journey of mine. And I think it's wonderful when you take a moment to stop and reflect where that actually takes you, and it tends to take you where you need to be. So I think that for me, I'm glad I left the financial services sector, and now I'm on this journey of working with businesses globally.
Lanier, I love that you asked this question because when I thought of what advice I would give someone, it's that you just don't know what is going to end up happening, and to just sort of enjoy the ride. Katie, we need to catch up later because Sydney is one of my favorite cities. I lived there for a little bit, but
I know all the good drinking spots, I can tell you later.
But I started my career in my early 20s in film and television. I was working in a very creative field, and then I ended up working on the Colbert Report for a little bit and getting more interested in politics and things like that. And then at the same time, someone very close to me got very sick and had to get a bone marrow transplant. So I spent a very long time with them in the hospital. And I decided to completely change my life, and I went to nursing school and became a nurse. And I worked in oncology, in reproductive health, in public health, and I started to really gain this passion for public health. I went and got my master's in public health from Johns Hopkins, and that's really become everything that happened before pushed me into the public health and policy sector that I am at today. And I couldn't have gotten to that point without every step before. So I really do think it's really interesting where life takes you. And, you know, I'm approaching 30 now, and I'm excited to see what the next decade holds. And I know it won't hold what I expect it to.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your stories. I don't think there's any other questions coming through the chat. Unless anyone has any last minute questions. Otherwise, this has been such an empowering, inspiring event. Thank you all. Many thanks again to Commissioner Danielle Cohen-Higgins in session 1 with Ms. Leila Aridi Afas. And thank you to all of you. Thank you, Emmy, Cami, Katie, and thank you so much, Monica, for moderating. It really has. I mean, I'm inspired. So happy International Women's Day to all of you, and to all of you who have joined us today. Thank you so much for your time. And those who are watching, this is a Facebook Live. You can go to the Global Chamber Miami page and watch it again. We will also send a link off to members. So thank you all. Take care.
Thank you, Linaire.
Thank you, Linaire and
Thank you,
Monica.
everyone.
Cami.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy International Women's Day.